Okay, so welcome to, I guess this is our fourth class, if I'm remembering correctly. So today I'm going to start with a brief review of what we've been covering so far, just to keep a context on what we're doing. We will be dealing with magazines today, but I'll do a bit of a review first before we proceed with chapter 5. Okay, our story so far. We've been talking obviously about communication. Now remember, there's a definition of communication I gave you from Vincent Mosco. Communication is a social process of exchange whose product is the mark or embodiment of a social relationship. Now, what I want you to remember from this definition, basically, communication is about relationships with other people. And at the individual level, it's about individual relationships. And at the level of mass communication, it's about relationships with many people and with people conceived in different ways. So we can conceive our relation with government, with society, with large communities that go far beyond our immediate orbit, beyond the people that we actually physically contact. So these kinds of relationships are structured by, they are informed by, to some extent, they're even created by the process of mass communication. Again, mass communication, this is communication that's transmitted to large segments of the population. And in that quote, the word transmitted, remember that word, that's a tricky word to use, because transmission suggests a particular direction, sending something. I think this word that we focus on in mass communication quite a bit, transmission, it's an important word because it does make us focus on communication technologies, and particularly electronic communication technologies, as essential to the process of mass communication. But what it loses, what it directs our attention away from, is that in all cases, even when one person doesn't have a voice, for example, when you're watching television, there's a signal that's transmitted out, and very little opportunity for viewers to speak back. Viewers receive signals, they don't speak back. So that emphasizes the idea of transmission in mass communication. But we have to remember always that even in mass communication, that process of delivery of a television signal outward to groups of people who may be sitting individually in front of their television screens, has an impact on social relationships. It has an impact on our relationships with society as a whole, and it has an impact on our relationships with other people. Part of what mass communication scholars try to do is to understand those kinds of relationships. We'll talk a little bit more about the Shirky video, and remember, I always bring you back to this video because I think it's a very important, I'm using it as a framing element for the course. that shirky video is about technology, but even more so, it's about the relationships that develop around and through technology. So keep that in mind. Just a moment, I'm going to pause because I remember last week I could see my full head on the screen, but people told me that my chin wasn't visible. It looked weird. And I see on my screen my chin is a little bit above. Am I framed okay, or do I look off center? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so the difference between transmission and communication, I won't say maybe difference. The words communication and transmission may tend to get us to focus on different things when we're looking at different issues, when we're looking at the same phenomena. This is a very important thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with academic discourse, but also when you're dealing with any argument, any position someone takes, they're framing the world in a particular way to make us focus on particular things. Right? If we focus on the word communication, focus on the process of communication as something that helps us build relationships and that conditions relationships, that may get us to think about the process somewhat differently than if we talk just about transmission, delivery of signals. Okay? It can have, these kinds of differences can have huge implications for how we see the world around us, and also for what potentials we see for changing the world, for making the world work in a way that we may like it to work. Okay, so continuing our story so far. We're concerned about culture. Remember, culture is the expressed and shared values, attitudes, beliefs, and practices of a social group, organization, or institution. Okay? Keep in mind, if we're thinking about mass communication, the ways we think about it have lots to do with culture. Right? So when we talk about communication as a process for building social relationships, those social relationships are inherently immersed in culture. If we talk about transmission, the idea of transmission is something that can have a strong impact on culture. Is also embedded somehow in our culture. And when I say culture, I use that word both collectively and let's say individually. I'm using the word culture right now, thinking about mass communication. I see the world as a place where we have separate cultures, different countries, different regions, different communities have different kinds of culture. At the same time, as Marshall McLuhan said, you remember a couple of weeks ago, I think we were talking about Marshall McLuhan, a media theorist who talked about the global village. Part of what he argued was that because mass media, electronic mass media, are bringing us together in an instant way and letting us see one another, or at least see other people in intimate ways, to see them, to hear them. This has a tendency to bring our world together in certain ways. In this sense, mass media participate in a blending, in some ways, a blending of cultures, and this can be seen in terms of drawing cultural ideas from different places, and it can also be seen as sharing shared understandings in some cases. I'm not going to go into lots of detail about that. It's a very complex idea. I just want to draw your attention to it so that you keep that in mind. So mass communication and culture are intimately linked in what we call a mass-mediated society, a society through which a very large portion of our interactions are conducted through mass media. Our culture, our shared sense of connection, understanding values, attitudes, and so on, becomes mediated through those technologies. Okay, to remind you about Clay Shirky and his argument. Clay Shirky was talking about focused on 21st century media, on the era in which the internet has become not just something new. Remember, he says it's not when media are brand new that they have a big impact on us. It's when they've been around for a while. When he said when they become technologically boring, what he means by this is the internet is no longer for most people a big innovation. The internet is an everyday thing through which we communicate. Right? So here I skipped forward one, I think. No, I apologize. I got ahead of myself here in my notes. So Shirky sets up his story as a transition from 20th century to 21st century media. So talking about 20th century media, he's talking about two sets of media. One set of media is media that are good for creating or forming groups. These are print technologies, broadcast technologies, recorded media. Recorded media would be things like phonograph records. Photographs are a form of recorded media. Cassette tapes, film, motion pictures on film, that sort of thing. So recorded media are all one-to-many forms of communication. In other words, as mass media, we print thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of copies of a newspaper, and they're delivered to large segments of the population through the experience of reading the same newspaper. Excuse me. People come to form a group because they're exposed to the same information and because they begin to conceive themselves as part of that group. Same thing with broadcast technologies. Many people watching television or listening to the radio, experiencing through transmission, experiencing exposure to the same information, and they begin to both to take on similar characteristics through exposure to the same information and also to understand themselves as part of the group. So this is how, when Shirky says that media are good for creating and forming groups, this is the kind of process that he's referring to. He distinguishes these in the 20th century environment from media that are good for conversations. Specifically, in this case, the telephone and the telegraph. He doesn't mention the conversational broadcast technologies like CB radio, walkie-talkies, probably because he doesn't want to confuse his message. But media that are good for conversations, in his view, in the 20th century, are media that create a channel between two people or small numbers of people. To be manageable, conversations oftentimes have to be constrained, limited to smaller numbers of people. So the telephone and the telegraph were the key technologies for this in the 20th century. They're one-to-one technologies, and they open up channels for two-way conversation, back and forth, right? So there's a difference in the ways that each of these establishes and promotes a social relationship. There's a different social relationship inherent in technologies that deliver the same information to lots of people through one-way channels than the social relationships that are developed through technologies that are exposed to smaller numbers of people and allow those people two-way conversation. Right? So when we talk about, when I raised Mosco's definition of communication, the social process of exchange whose product is the mark or embodiment of a social relationship, that's the kind of thing that definition is trying to get us to understand. The relationships that are encouraged through particular kinds of mass media, through particular kinds of mass media can be different depending on how those media are organized. Okay, moving on now with Shirky. For 21st century media, and this is where I sort of got ahead of myself a minute ago. 21st century media, this is where the internet develops. Actually, the internet was developing at the end of the 20th century. It became popularized. The World Wide Web first emerged in the 1990s, but didn't become an everyday thing for many people until the very late 1990s, 2000s. So in the 21st century, and again, Shirky points out, it's not the brand new technology that's most important in the process of mass communication, the process through which social relationships are formed. It's when people start forgetting about the technology itself and just using the technology, doing things with it, that the technology starts to have the biggest impact. In other words, when a communication technology becomes an everyday part of our media culture, that's the point at which it has a bigger impact on culture at large and on the broad array of social relationships that in which we're involved. Okay? Shirky points out the internet has native support for convening groups and holding conversations. In other words, in the 20th century environment, all the communication technologies that we talked about were technologically separate. They worked in different ways. They were delivered through different channels. It wasn't technologically possible, really, to merge them. At least not easily enough to make that merger something that was widely available to people. That's changed with the internet. The internet, computers basically treat all information equally. All information on the internet is just a collection of ones and zeros, computer readable information. And our computers change that information, take the kind of information we deliver, voice, video, text, they convert it all into digitized information, into information that can be understood by a computer and transmitted quickly and deliver it. This is the key element of digitized technology that allows the internet to become the platform through which all other media come together. Okay? So remember the term convergence. There are different types of convergence. This is an example of technological convergence, where all previous media, from Shirky's perspective, all previous media, all the 20 examples of 20th century media, merged together technologically on the internet, because the internet is technologically capable of delivering all those pieces of information simultaneously from the same platform. All media come together in a single technology, a single technological platform. This is an example of technological convergence. And for Shirky, it's extraordinarily important. It's important because now we live in a world where all these ways of communication happen right here in front of us, in front of one tool, whether it's a personal computer, a laptop, a tablet, a phone. All these technologies now are able to manage all these sorts of information. And that means that we relate differently, not just to communication technologies, but to one another. Okay. Remember Shirky's focus, and this part I didn't put in the slides here, but Shirky's focus, he tells us a few stories in his presentation. His stories are all about political relationships. He tells us a story about an earthquake in China and how people responded to that earthquake, and ultimately how the government responded to those people. I won't go into details just in the interest of time, but he's completely focused on the ways that people relate both to one another and to the institutions that are political institutions that manage our world. Those are the relationships he's most interested in this presentation. Another example he uses is Barack Obama. Now he sort of puts a counterpoint. The Chinese example is an example of people attempting to exert some autonomy, some authority, and they do make some progress, but ultimately the government silences the protests. And he contrasts this to the example of a website run by Barack Obama, Barack Obama's presidential campaign, and later the same website is managed now that he's president. They were talking about, he was talking about the reaction that the Obama campaign had to a group that emerged on the website, criticizing a position that Obama took, and how Obama didn't try to control. Now he's contrasting, I think, two examples. An example which ends with government asserting itself and trying to take control against the community of people communicating online, and another example of someone in a governing position not trying to take control, but trying to listen and create space and respond. Shirky doesn't really discuss the comparison, but I think it's implicit in his presentation, is that one way of doing this is more effective than the other. And that if we want to be effective communicators in the 21st century, we have to learn to change, and we have to learn the effective ways to communicate. And when we talk about effective communication, we're talking about effective relationships. Okay, I think that will take us about as far as I want to go right now with Shirky's presentation. But as you can see, I do think that this presentation is very interesting and very useful for the things it tries to bring out to get us to think not just about the internet and the impact of the internet, but to get us to think about communication and communication technologies and the building of social relationships. So I do ask you, through the course of the term, watch that at least a few times. Okay, we've talked also about theories of mass communication. Theories are things that give us ideas about the relationship between mass communication and culture. They deal with questions like, how do media influence us? Are media strong or are audiences strong? Remember, in the early broadcast era, there was this hypodermic needle theory that developed, which basically suggests that media act like something, like a shot, like something that can inoculate us, have an immediate impact on us. That audiences are weak, can be manipulated. In contrast, other theories talk about audiences as people who do things with media, who have control and who aren't easily fooled. This is a very key issue in media theory, understanding the effects of media and using that information to try to communicate more effectively. We talked also about some methods of media research. Remember, methods of research are the ways that we have of investigating the relationship, our relationship with media and culture, the effects of media. We can understand, we can gather information to help us understand media in a variety of ways. Everything from interviewing people about how they experience media to keeping statistics on things that are happening online. How many people are watching a particular program, or what action do people take when faced with, when given a certain set of information. So that's what media research methods help us to do. They help us to gather information in a systematic way that ideally should help us to better understand media and their impact. Okay, continuing our story so far. We're going now through a history of media. We distinguish between different kinds of communication, and there's a transition that happens in communication, beginning with, excuse me, face-to-face communication, moving on through early written media, to the development of papyrus, parchment, and paper, the development of the codex, bindings that keep large amounts of paper together, the development of the Gutenberg press, which was the first example of mass production of print technology, which allowed for the reproduction many times over, much more quickly than previously possible, of the same printed information. That's the moment that we see as the emergence of the first mass media. And last week we talked about the development of books and newspapers. When we talked about books and newspapers, what we're doing is we're talking about print technology and then focusing on the development of particular industries. So when we talk about books, when we talk about newspapers, we're talking both about technology and also about industries that develop, businesses that start to develop around particular technologies. I think this is important to keep in mind, and keep in mind that what we're talking about now, in terms of each of these chapters that deal with particular forms of communication, is not just technology as such, but we're talking about technology that develops within a particular economic system, defined for the most part as a capitalist system, not exclusively, but the development of these industries is predicated on the possibility of those industries being economically supported. So keep that in mind as we move forward. And now we will move on to magazines, and I'll pause for just a moment to get a drink and be back with you. Our examination of magazines begins, as many of our chapters do, with a story that's meant to illustrate some things for us. This story is about Gourmet Magazine. Gourmet Magazine was a very respected food magazine. It began publishing in 1941 and was owned by ultimately by the Conde Nast magazine chain. This was a huge magazine chain that has many different prestigious magazines. They stopped publishing in October 2009. Excuse me. The reason that they stopped publishing was that they could no longer draw advertising dollars. They couldn't fund the magazine anymore. Now remember, last week in discussing newspapers, we talked about the importance of advertising as the underlying support for newspapers, and we also talked about the difficulty that newspapers are having now because they've lost a lot of their advertising dollars. There's a similar thing with magazines. Magazines have relied for quite some time on advertising as their primary source of income. In the case of Gourmet Magazine was faced with competition from other cooking magazines, from celebrity cooking programs, from celebrities appearing as cooks in different places, television shows where cooking is a competition. Cross-platform. When we say cross-platform, we mean there were the development of a set of information that uses different communication technologies. So Conde Nast with Gourmet Magazine ultimately was competing with where people could get information online about cooking, where people could get information on television about cooking, as well as other magazines, newspapers, and that sort of thing. In an environment where people can very quickly go to the internet and search for a recipe and find professional websites, personal websites, online videos, instructional videos, places where people have posted recipes, so on and so forth, that the amount of choice and the speed at which people can get it means they may not choose to wait for a magazine. They may not choose to pay for a magazine. They may find there are better sources of information than a magazine for getting the information that they need. The closure of Gourmet excuse me, is just one of any number of examples of older media institutions that have had to either adapt, change, and maybe have died because of the changes that have happened in communication in the past 30 years or so. Excuse me. So a few examples, a few things to understand about the closure of Gourmet Magazine. One example is the issue of concentration. There are now a number of publishers, a relatively small number of publishers who are accumulating more and more titles. Conde Nast was one of those. Is one of those publishers. The titles that a publisher issues are sources of income for them. They're commodities. Excuse me. Commodities are. They're commodities that survive based on a return on investment. So when a company publishes a magazine, they expect to get a certain amount of money back. Conde Nast was losing money on Gourmet Magazine as a result of lost advertising revenue, lower numbers of subscribers. In the magazine industry, the magazines that have survived, that continue to survive, are ones that have been able to take advantage of a certain level of economic and technological convergence. Increasingly, they're cross-platform. They exist both on the internet and in print form. Increasingly, some magazines are going to online only. Some magazines also have relationships with television programs and that sort of thing. That's another example of technological convergence, cross-platform relationship. This kind of convergence is helping some old media survive in the new media world. Okay, let's get into a little bit into our historical overview. Magazines, as we know them today, first emerged in emerged in Europe. In the 1600s, we saw a broad expansion of commerce. We saw growth of education, and we saw the rise of bourgeois classes, what we call the development of early capitalism. There were cultural shifts in this era. Money was made differently. There were classes of people, business people, that were emerging and becoming more powerful as commerce and trade developed internationally, and as these classes grew, and as their ways of making money and building power grew, they took advantage of the technologies that were available to expand business and to understand the world around them. Early magazines like newspapers are a form of communication technology that was very much influenced by this cultural environment in which they were developing. The earliest examples of something we could point to as a magazine are things like brochures, pamphlets, almanacs. An almanac is a published periodical that would often contain useful information about weather, events, that sort of thing that many people relied on. Early magazines were something somewhere between news and entertainment. In Europe, the first thing that we point to as a true magazine is something called Edifying Monthly Discussions. This was published by a theologian and poet named Johann Ries, and it appeared in Germany between the years of 1663 and 1668. Now, I think it's telling that a person who's both a theologian and a poet is the driving force behind the first, what we call the first true magazine, because the transition to capitalism in Europe was also a transition from an era heavily dominated by the church institutions, to an era in which there were business became a dominant force. So it makes sense that a theologian would be somebody who's involved with the earliest magazines, because churches had a tradition of communication through text in place. The very earliest of publications, remember last week we watched a tongue-in-cheek, a humorous video of a monk who reproducing by hand Bible discovers photocopying and starts photocopying. It's a joke, but the joke relies on the historical fact that religious publications were the dominant form of publication for many years. So culturally very interesting, and perhaps not surprising that somebody coming from a theological background is involved in what we call the very first example of a true magazine. There are examples of other literary journals developing at this time in Germany, France, the Netherlands. The appearance of the Gutenberg press and the increase in the prevalence of printed material helped to increase the level of literacy in the world, and created demand. When people are exposed to texts, they learn how to read, then they want to read more, and that creates a demand. That creates a situation in which people are asking for more, buying more printed material. There was an increase. The increase in literacy meant an increase in literacy also for women, and there was the very first example of a women's magazine. Was called Athenian Mercury, and that came out first in 1693. Literacy and literacy among different communities of people creates the possibility of targeting information, of creating specialized information particularly for that community. In the early 1700s, British publishers started to develop the formats that were used in Europe, and some of the publications that emerged in Britain were things like the Review, the Tatler, and the Spectator. These are actually names of publications that are familiar to people, at least people who grew up in the later decades of the 20th century, because there were still magazines by those titles published in Britain at that time. In the United States, early magazines started to appear in the 1740s, 1741, what we call the colonial era. This is the era when Britain controlled colonies in the United States. The early publications that emerged in the colonies had low readership and high distribution costs. This was actually a problem. One of the reasons that the colonies, the American colonies, were dependent on Britain for so long was that they hadn't developed sufficiently their own industries, their own publication companies, and that sort of thing. So by the end of, there was a transition in the Americas, which went along with the transition also of to development of economy and development of independence from Britain. By the end of the 1700s, now that the American Revolution happened in the mid 1770s in the colonies, which declared themselves in 1776 declared themselves an independent country. By the end of the 1700s, there were 100 regular magazines published in the United States. So there was a transition. This transition happened simultaneous with economic and political transition, and the United States by the end of 1700s had 100 regular magazines that were being published. Now, another thing we should say about publications and the American experience is that pamphlets, publications were very important in the process of the American Revolution, in informing people and calling them to a cause. So there was a political element involved in communication through print technologies in this era. We should keep in mind, and certainly this is the norm in any cultural era, but we should keep in mind when we hear about things going on in the contemporary era involving communication and political action, that's a phenomenon that has been persistent throughout human culture. We communicate issues of that nature through whatever media we have available to us. In the 1830s, there developed what we call mass appeal magazines. Now, some of the things that were going on at this time, the cost of publishing and distributing magazines was going down. The United States government, one of the early things that the United States government did was to try to promote transportation and communication in the Americas. Now, this was related to the expansion of territory in the Americas. And one of the things that the United States did was to establish and promote the United States Post Office. Benjamin Franklin, who was one of the major figures in the American Revolution, was one of the proponents, one of the big advocates for post office. The idea was, it's very important if you want to communicate effectively. You have to have a strong sense of the possibility of distributing communication. That means you have to have good transportation systems. You have to have, and the United States Post Office was an institution that was established in order to get information, print information from one place to another place in a reliable manner. This expansion of the post office and the reliable the reliable delivery of print information at low-cost delivery of print information really helped the expansion of the magazine industries. It helped promote the expansion of literacy by making publications more available to more people. It helped expand literacy and also literacy among women, and also helped expand the roles of women in social life. Publishers began producing mass market magazines for general readers rather than specialized readers, rather than people just interested in politics. They started publishing, for example, what are called women's magazines. There was one called Godey's Ladies' Book that was published from 1830 to 1898, which employed more than 150 women. This was there are examples like this that communication historians come up with that suggest the impact of broadening of communication technology and of the expansion of magazine industries was felt in a number of social groups. An example, the Saturday Evening Post. The Saturday Evening Post was the first example of a commercially successful mass market magazine. The Saturday Evening Post began publishing in 1821, and it continued continuous publication until 1969. In the 1950s and 1960s, they suffered declining readership, lower numbers of readers, and this was blamed in large part on competition from television and on cultural change. Now, the Saturday Evening Post was a magazine that was associated with I would say associated with relatively conservative American life. It presented a cultural image of the United States that reflected traditional community values, I think. I've posted here, I've put a couple of illustrations from Saturday Evening Post. Saturday Evening Post was known for running artwork by an artist whose name was Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell was an artist who made his entire career on painting, depicting images of people in settings that would be very well known to Americans growing up in the mid 1900s, the late 1900s. He showed images that were oftentimes humorous and were thought to evoke a sort of positive emotional response to traditional American community. I think it's interesting to look at the Saturday Evening Post. Its closure came at a time in the mid-1960s, late 1960s, when there was lots of cultural turmoil in the United States. People were turning away from traditional cultural images, perhaps traditional cultural values, and losing interest perhaps in things like the Post. So, I just wanted to raise that issue with you. The magazine closed, after it closed in 1969, later on, a couple of years later, it was reopened as a health magazine. And at least of a couple of years ago, I didn't check recently, but at least as of a few years ago, it still existed as a general interest magazine. I believe they were online also, covering general interest topics, but no longer, it's no longer a magazine that has anywhere near the kind of audience that they used to have. So, like Gourmet, and even more so than Gourmet Magazine, the Saturday Evening Post was a magazine that was really a cultural institution in the United States. It was very well known. It was well known even to people who weren't readers of the magazine, and it reflected a sense of American culture. The magazine itself was part of many people's understanding of American culture. When the magazine closed, there was from many people there was a sense of loss. I think at the loss of a cultural institution, as separate from the loss of a commodity, a commercial enterprise that failed. Okay, if we look at the pattern of development of the magazine industries, a combination of decreasing costs and increasing readership really helped the magazine industries to develop. An example, in 1893, McClure's magazine began publishing at a price of 15 cents. This was significantly less than what other magazines were sold for at that point, about half the cost of what other magazines were being sold for. And when they did that, their readership increased significantly. This started a trend toward development of mass market magazines. Cosmopolitan magazine started selling for 12.5 cents. Muncie magazine for 10 cents. Well, what this meant was when the cost came down, the price of a magazine comes down, the circulation went up. More people decided it was worth their money to buy the magazine. When the circulation goes up, when more people read the magazine, the lost revenue from the decreasing cover cost of the magazine can be replaced by increasing the cost of advertising. In other words, if you're selling a magazine and you have 10,000 subscribers, people who buy advertising in the magazine will be aware that 10,000 people may potentially see it. If you have 50,000 subscribers, that becomes much more valuable to the advertisers. They know there will be more people exposed to the advertisement in the magazine. By cutting costs, by cutting the cover cost of a magazine and increasing the number of readers, magazines were actually increasing their profits because they could demand more money for the advertising. And that significantly helped the expansion of the magazine industry in the late 1800s and early 1900s. In the early 20th century, there was development of news magazine. Now, one of the things that really helped the expansion of magazines as a news medium, okay, one of the differences between magazines and newspapers. Most newspapers, traditionally and still today, most newspapers are published for an audience in and around a particular city. Right? Major newspapers in the United States are the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, and so on. Most of the major newspapers are associated with a particular city. Even if they get exposure, and now increasingly, of course, publications are global, but newspapers are still focused on and associated with a particular city. Magazines are different, and they developed as something different. Magazines developed because they tend to have smaller circulation, because they tend to be published less frequently. They also tend to market themselves not as local to one city, but as national, regional, even international publications. In the early 20th century, one of the things that helped establish what we call the news magazine, and some examples include Time Magazine, U.S. News and World Report, and so on. The expansion of improved communication through telegraph, telephone, and radio helped develop news magazines with a global focus. So Time Magazine, Forbes Magazine, which is a news business magazine, and Newsweek are a few of the magazines that emerged in the first quarter of the 20th century. Those magazines relied very much on communication technologies that would bring them news from other places quickly, so that they could publish it and then distribute magazines that would have news in them that was still relatively current. It was important in that era. It continues to be important, but in that era, it was important to have information that was current in order to stay competitive. So the convergence of these two technologies in this case happened because the people who were creating the magazine were able to use communication technologies to gather information for the magazine and then distribute the magazine through more traditional channels. Picture magazines also developed in the 1900s and really promoted the rise of photojournalism, journalism that relies on photography. Now, we can find examples, of course, of photojournalism much earlier with the rise of photography, but the rise of communication technology, the improvement of photographic technologies that allowed for easy transportation of cameras, quick delivery of images, easy reproduction of images in text. Those technological advances helped expand photojournalism. There were magazines like Life magazine. Life magazine was a magazine that was mostly made up of photography. And like the Saturday Evening Post, it was a long-running magazine that was very closely associated with relatively traditional views of America, perhaps not quite as traditional as Saturday Evening Post, that also failed around the same time. They failed in 1972, just a few years after Saturday Evening Post closed. There were other magazines, Look, Focus, and Pick magazine. All these magazines no longer exist, but were, in their time, were very prominent magazines that you'd see on the newsstand. People would be very familiar with them. competition from radio, television, later on the internet, helped promote and enable a lot of the changes in the magazine industries. So the changes in magazines over the years, there have been advances in communication technology have created opportunity for magazines where publishers could take advantage of communication technologies to do what they do better. But they've also presented new competition, and oftentimes traditional magazines that haven't been able to adapt to that competition have failed. So changes in technology create both opportunities and challenges for existing communication media. Early magazines. Now we're going back to the 1800s, the 1700s. Now early magazines tended to be fairly regional, and this was because the costs of printing and the costs of transporting magazines were still relatively high at that point. They tended to have smaller regional audiences and not such a large cultural impact. The lowering of cost. Well, we talked already about the post office and lower costs of transporting magazines. There were also things like increasing commerce in the 19th century. Helped increase commerce translates into people having more spending money, and also into advertisers wanting more to spend more money on advertising. So commercial changes had a big impact on development of the magazine industry in this era. Magazines helped introduce literature to mass audiences. There were and there continue to be magazines that are focused specifically on literature of various kinds. You may be familiar with things like science fiction magazines, detective story magazines. There are magazines that deal with what we call more serious literature. Magazines were a very good medium for sharing, for distributing stories, and particularly the short story as a form. The short story emerged largely, was largely promoted by magazine industries, because short stories, stories of say 15 pages in length, fit very well to the magazine medium. In the late 1800s, there was an emergence of something we call pulp fiction. This is, if you know the term pulp, pulp is the product, the halfway. Pulp is something that's developed from wood in the process of making paper. You take a tree, you crush it and mix it with water, and it makes a kind of a messy substance with wood chips in it, which we call pulp. So that's where that term comes from. The term pulp fiction refers to not very high class, not very developed form of literature, like comic books, or the kind of reading that people do when they're in a bus station and there are lots of distractions. Easy to read. in the late 1800s, there was development of kind of mass market, lower class fiction and comics and things of this nature. Now, why do we mention this? We mention this because it's an example of the cultural impact of one cultural impact of a communication technology. In this era, people started to become concerned about the cultural impact of the things that people were reading. Publishers were producing stories that were, and pictures that were graphic, that would draw an audience because they were violent or contained sexual activity, things like that. And some segments of the population started to complain. So government stepped in. And the result was that the publishers came up with what we call, excuse me, a form of self-regulation. Rather than having government step in directly and tell publishers, here's what you can publish and here's what you can't publish. Excuse me. Rather than government stepping in and telling publishers directly what they could and couldn't publish, which is a problem in the United States because of the constitutional requirement against censorship. An example of self-regulation by industry. Two examples are the Publishers Code, which was developed in 1948, and the Comics Code Authority, which was an organization which publishers created to sort of police the content of their own publications. There are other examples we'll talk about later in the course, but media industries have frequently had to found themselves in positions where they were facing criticism, and they developed forms of self-regulation in order to avoid government regulation. Uh, 1944 saw the first publication of 17 magazine. 17 magazine was aimed at teenagers. And this is interesting because economic expansion in this era, the expansion, the availability of more resources, meant that teenagers were emerging as a market. They were starting to buy things. They were starting to buy record albums. They were starting to buy clothing. They were starting to spend their money in restaurants. And magazines picked up on this. Magazines, the development of teen magazines was, in a sense, both an attempt to get money directly from teenagers when they paid for the magazine, and also an attempt to create, a very successful attempt to create a vehicle to advertise to teenagers, to advertise the things that teenagers started buying. I think it's difficult for us sometimes to understand this, to grasp a time when there may not have been a teen market or much interest in a teen market or even a sense of paying any attention to teenagers at all. But the emergence of teen magazines and the recognition of of teenagers as a group is very closely tied to economic development, particularly in the United States at that time. Economic development and the attempt to market things to teens, to sell things to teenagers, to people who now had their own money to spend. We talked about gatekeepers last week. The idea that mass media, that the people who run mass media, particularly in the 20th century environment, have a particular amount of influence because they're able to make choices about what to cover, what gets in the publication, what they produce, that sort of thing. There are different ways that this works with magazines. The format of a magazine, this could be anything from the way the magazine is laid out, who it's marketed to, that sort of thing. That has a lot to do potentially with who gets the information. Now, it doesn't prevent people from prevent one segment or another from getting information, but it makes it more accessible, more attractive to one segment than another. In magazines, publishers, editors, journalists, writers can choose to publish certain information or not publish it. This is another way of controlling access to information. There is influence by advertisers. When advertising dollars play a significant role in the financing of a publication, advertisers can and often do tell publications what they think they should and should not cover. There are different editorial tendencies at different magazines, and these have an influence over what a magazine will and won't publish. So these are different examples of how magazines have an influence over access to information. When we think about magazine industries, it's good to think about the, magazines as segmented into different specializations. There are trade publications. These are publications you won't usually see on a newsstand. Trade publications are generally marketed to people who work in particular industries. There are trade publications for communication industries. There are trade publications for oil and gas industries, electronic industries, and they carry very specialized information. They are usually lower circulation publications. They may have higher costs, per copy costs, and they're marketed to very specialized groups. Similarly, scholarly publications. These are publications that are marketed to academics. They carry academic articles, and they rely on people working in academic institutions to produce their content. Religious groups, political groups have their publications, and there are publications that are marketed particularly to these groups. Fiction, hobby, interest. Now, this is important to understand. Basically, to understand that there are different strategies to marketing magazines, and some of them, general magazines, try to get very large subscriber bases and be sold to large numbers of people, whereas these specialized magazines try to reach smaller groups, and may have different strategies for doing that. 1948 was the emergence of television. Right now we're feeling the impact of the internet on magazines, but the emergence of television in the late 1940s also had a big impact on television. Television became a competitor to magazines, drawing audiences away from magazines. We saw a couple of weeks ago, I asked you to look at clips of the Ed Sullivan Show, which was showing, I think I had you look maybe at Elvis Presley or the Beatles appearing on Ed Sullivan. This was a competitor with magazines, which could give people direct access to things that were different than magazines, and they were drawing away audiences. The competition inspired magazines in this era to become increasingly visual. So a lot of magazines in this era shifted from being primarily lots of text to using a lot more pictures, to graphics, focusing a lot more on an attractive layout than they had before that point. And television increasingly became a subject for magazines. So magazines would focus in their stories on television programming, on stars, on the business of television, and so on. So these are just a few of the ways that that television had an impact on the magazine industry. Now we're seeing the influence of the internet on magazines, and these examples, these are just a couple of examples, but one influence has been the presence, the development of either magazines that have both a print version and an online version, and they may be closely connected. The online version often has additional content, allows readers to comment, may have video, audio, basically taking advantage of the technological possibilities of the internet. We've also seen the rise of online-only magazines, websites organized like magazines, and the development of supplementary features, 24/7 updating, and so on. So the magazine, the magazine format has changed immensely. The format of magazines themselves is changing, and the presence of the development of magazine format online means that there are huge changes taking place in the magazine industry as well. Am I okay, sir? I'm sorry, Chiwan, I'm sorry, I didn't see that comment that you made a while ago. Yeah, I'm okay, I'm just fighting a cold, and I apologize for all the coughing and pausing that I've had to do today. So, I'm going to sign off now with this. That's about what I wanted to cover with magazines today. Again, I apologize for my, it was probably a distraction for you all, coughing and sneezing, but hopefully I'll get over this and it won't be a problem next week. I hope that this has been helpful for you. Please, I used all my time, so I have to go very quickly to my next class, so I don't have time to pause for questions now. Please, if you have any questions, post them back to the group, and hopefully we'll deal with them there. I hope you all have a good week. I think you take a 10-minute break now, I believe. Maybe Ken can confirm that. Yes, okay, back at 12:15. And then, yeah, and Ken will take over from there. So have a good week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
시작하면 되겠습니다. Okay, thank you, sir. So, good morning, everybody. My name is Charles Joe. 괜찮으십니까? 네. So, good morning, sir. My name is Charles Joe, and I'm a sophomore of Commodification University. And before the presentation, I want to say something about my English pronunciation and accent. Too long? Okay. How about now? It's good? Still too loud? It's about English. So, and unfortunately, I don't have any girlfriend since 2010, and I think that that's the reason of my terrible English. If you can understand what I'm saying, please understand and tell me instantly. So today our subject is magazine. On October 5, 2009, publisher Conde Nast announced that the November 2009 issue of the respected food magazine Gourmet would be its last. The decision came as a shock to many readers who since 1941 had believed that Gourmet was to food what food is to fashion, a magazine with a rich history and perched high in the publishing firmament. The elimination of Gourmet received the most attention because of the publication's long history and popularity. Some readers were angry about the sudden print halt. Some understood that the closure was simply a reflection of a changing market. So, this appears to be green news for an industry that has survived since the 17th century. Magazines may not be truly absolute. Many analysts are hopeful that the magazine industry, with its long, complex past, is simply in a slump. According to the Magazine Publisher of America, some 70,383 magazines appeared in publication in 2008. The following year, media private equity firm Barron's Schuller Stevenson predicted that magazine ad revenues would stabilize in 2013. The magazine industry may change drastically over the next several years. This evolution may be affected by a number of variables, such as the internet, a new generation of readers, of advertising costs, and the recovery from generation of readers, the fluctuation of advertising costs, and the recovery from the 2008 recession. What remains to be seen is whether the magazine industry can continue to be a dominant force in American culture in the midst of this change. So yes, magazine will be changed, laptop will be changed, is must be changed to survive. Okay, next. The history of magazine publishing. Like the newspaper, the magazine has a complex history shaped by the cultures in which it developed. Examining the industry's roots and its transformation over the time can contribute to a better understanding of the modern industry. The early magazines, after the printing press became prevalent in Europe, early publishers began to conceptualize the magazine. Modern magazine first appeared during the 17th century. Soon publishers realized that irregular publication schedules required too much time and energy. Early magazines occupied the middle ground between the news source and reading for pleasure. So these one, two, three. This one, two magazine is my first magazine in my book. So first is a publication in Germany in 1663 and 1668 in Germany. And this is the first two magazine. And second one is in Netherlands, 1684. And these early magazines published for education and religion and youth. The first one is later renamed in France, then Mercure de France in 1672, and other magazines kept to a different leader than did other more intellectual publication of the day, opening article for entertainment and enjoyment rather than for education. And second one is 1693, and the first magazine written specially for women. And the Review and the Catalog and the Spectre is three major influential magazines published regularly in Great Britain at 18th century. American Magazine and General Magazine is 1741 and first American magazines. Just for me. I'm sorry. And the arrival of the 20th century brought with new types of magazine, including youth, business, and picture magazine. In time, this type of publication came to dominate the industry and attract best leadership. First one is a news magazine. Publishers designed the news magazine for the worldwide information by developed technology. Business Week is from since 1929, and they focus on the global market. And Forbes, 1917, and one of the most popular financial magazines too. Newsweek is 1933, and former Time coordinator founded this Newsweek. And this Newsweek and Forbes is very friendly magazine still now. And next is picture magazine. photojournalism, or the telling of story through photography, also became popular during the early 20th century. Although magazines had been running illustrations since the 19th century, as photography grew in popularity too, so did picture magazine. And that like from since 1936 by Henry Luce. Yeah, next. And the next is the role of the magazines in the development of American popular culture. The late 19th century brought with it increase in mass circulation for the U.S. magazine industry. This means that magazines that had once targeted only a small part of country suddenly began reaching a nationwide audience, and advertisement became increasingly vital to magazine industry. Advertisers sought to reach a large audience, and magazine widely offered them that opportunity. Selling advertising space at higher rate, that national market was an entirely new one for publishers and advertisers. However, market research has its limits. Many publishers instead embrace the potential of magazine to simply tell people what they want or need, thus solidifying the role of the magazine as a driver of popular culture. As one editor of both articulate, if we find out what people want, it's already too late. I'm sorry. And popular literature in the magazine. Magazines offered a place not only for advertisers but also for authors and poets to reach a large audience. Magazines offered a place not only for advertisers but also for authors and poets to reach a large audience. Several publications regularly hire both new and established authors to write stories. As circulation increased, so did the desire for these authors to publish their work. In Korea, most of the literature magazines was disappeared, and people buy the book like self-help book or guidebook for job only. Next is Pulp magazine. During the late 1800s, a new type of magazine was established, the Pulp magazine, an old fiction publication named for its wood pulp magazine, wood pulp paper. At the time, dime novels did not qualify for the same inexpensive postal rates that magazines did, but the pulp did. Suddenly, individuals had the opportunity to read popular genre. 교수님 발음을 어떻게 하면 됩니까? 장르인데. genre fiction in this cheap magazine, like adventure, horror stories, startling stories, and weird tales. And entertainment magazines. The success of the first encouraged another major transformation in mainstream journalism, the rise of entertaining pen magazines, typically focused on television, film, and music. Pen magazines emerged as national entertainment during the early 20th century. Last is teen magazine. During the 1940s, many publishers began pursuing teenagers, previously ignored demographic. 17 magazine hit shelves in 1944, setting the stage for later publications such as Tiger Beat and Teen People. This magazine targeted young women, offering stories on fashion, makeup, celebrity news, and lifestyles. Since their beginning, teen magazines have kept their article relatively brief, instead reaching their target audience with bright and bold photos. Next page. Next page is how magazines control the public's access to information. First is format. In general, the format of most magazines allows for a more in-depth discussion of a topic than is possible in the relatively constrained space available in newspapers. Frequently allow for double the word count when publishing articles of great interest. And choice to publish. Just as newspapers do, magazines control which stories is the public by deciding which article to include in their publications. As might be expected, the choice of stories depends on the political climate and on global events. Next is advertisers' influence. Magazines drive approximately half of their income from advertisers. With such a large stake in the magazine industry, advertisers can play a major role in deciding which stories are printed. Because magazines are so dependent on advertisers for their revenue, they are caution about the content they place in their page. Editorial lineage. Each magazine has its own editorial slant, which helps determine which stories get published and how those stories are presented. Readers should understand. There are several variable affect the article that they see in each publication. And online news sources. The internet has significantly changed the way that the public receives information. Today, several online-only magazines provide for little to no cost news and coverage that would have previously been available only through print publications. In Korea, some reporters gathering news in the internet only. For these reasons, most of Koreans have disbelief about the online news magazine. Sorry. Next is specialization of magazine. Over the last century, magazines have slowly moved into more specialized, pragmatic groupings. This transformation from general interest to niche publication began with the popularization of television. No longer were ads just going out to the general public. Instead, advertisers could target groups by gender, age, race, class, and social and cultural interests. Market fragmentation has and probably will continue to proliferate. customization and individualization will probably be the continuing trend. And scholarly publication. Academic journals have, in some form, been around since the early years of magazine publication. Today, hundreds of scholarly journals exist, such as the American Economy Review and the Journal of Marriage and Families, and every academic field has its own array of journals to which scholars can contribute. Scholarly publication is essential for graduate students and university faculty members as they seek to disseminate their ideas and progress in their careers. I'm sorry, it's too hard. Okay. And next is religious groups. With faith at the center of many individuals' lives, it is highly surprising that there are thank you, hundreds of magazines dedicated to religious groups. The magazine's publishers state that cross-current serves as a global network for people of faith and intelligence who are committed to connecting the wisdom of the heart of the life of the mind. Next is political groups. Political groups also have capitalized on the magazine industry, whether liberal or conservative. Most people can find a publication that reflect their political opinions. You can understand what I'm saying? I don't know. And next is pulp and genre fiction magazine. Is critical to pronunciation. Genre. Actually, genre fiction is one of the literature in America and Europe, but most of Koreans think genre fiction, like science fiction or fantasy, is a childish thing, and never accept genre fiction as literature. So most of the genre fiction magazine was disappeared, and only few writers survived in the online genre site. And last is hobby and interest magazine. Perhaps the most populated classification is that of hobby and special interest magazines, a reflection of the wide array of hobbies and interests that different individuals enjoy. Many magazines about hobby and interest exist in Korea, but not variety. Most of all write articles about sports, fishing, motorcycle, and computer. Generally, people of Korea leave the office illegally, and they don't have any time for their hobby. In addition, most of Koreans really care about other people's thinking. Then that makes just few hobbies exist in Korea. There is influence of the interest on the magazine industry. In March of 2010, Consumer List published a story titled "Print edition of TV Guide tells me to go online to read most of the cover story." According to the article, TV Guide printed a story listing TV's top 50 families, but shocked readers by including only the top 20 families in its print version. To discover the rest of the list, readers needed to go online. reflects an ongoing trend in magazine journalism, the movement toward online reporting. Just like their newspaper cousins, magazines have been greatly affected by the influence of the internet. With so much information available online, advertisers and readers are accessing content on the internet, causing declines in both revenue and readership. These changes are forcing magazines to adapt to increasingly online market. Online-only magazine. Unfortunately for the magazine industry, young sentiment reflects a trend that has been building for some time. Several other publications have followed in Peace Magazine's footsteps, making the move from print to online only. Journals such as Elgar and the Film People that were once available in print can now be viewed only via the internet. As printing costs rise and advertising and subscription revenue decrease, more magazines will likely be making similar shifts too. And magazines like websites. In recent years, websites that function much as magazines once did, without officially being publications themselves, have become increasingly popular online model. This hybrid of magazines like content with new media content offers a possible version of the digital future of print publication. And print magazine with online presences. Indeed, most print magazines have created websites. Nearly every major print publication has a site available either for free or through subscription. Some magazines have online archive collections. These collections generally do not print entire article or complete issues. Still, even without the entire collection online, there is a distinct benefit of being able to search back for article from 1923 from a computer. This is a final question. So, is print dead? Regardless of your position, the fact that the print industry is facing hardships is unquestionable. Magazines are rethinking their marketing strategies to remain viable in an increasingly online world. But many are hopeful that journalists will find a way to publish both in print and on the internet. Obviously, internet brings the crisis of magazines. That's true, but internet is too wide. So many people need guide them for about their interest for their interest things like magazine. Not the same as 20th century, but magazines still have their own place, their own place in somewhere. And if publishers find that place, then magazine gives so many information and pressure to us again. Okay, thank you. My presentation is over. Thank you for this. Bye.
On the below your PowerPoint, Changrat, there's a where you're advancing your PowerPoint. There's also a square button to click to turn off your PowerPoint, so that I can control that area again because I need to bring up a PowerPoint too. So click the square button on the on that bar that allows you to go forwards and backwards. So at the bottom, not the top, but the bottom. There you go. Good job. Okay, let me. Let me just cover a couple of things real quick. I didn't go over it adequately before, and I apologize for that. There was some confusion with students kind of coming and going before we settled down, and I realize now we didn't kind of review everything we needed to do. First off, as part of your syllabus, there is a grading sheet that helps you to see what I'm going to score it on. It doesn't really say here, so let me add, probably you should aim towards about 20 minutes for your presentation, and realize that even if you were a native speaker, such as Frederick, you're not going to cover everything. You can't cover everything. So do focus in on the things that you think are most interesting. If there's something you can localize, that would be great. Something that relates to, to your home country, as Chengrat did do some of that. But you decide what you can cover, but certainly don't try to cover the whole chapter, and try to aim at about 20 minutes. Part of it, however, is also to be towards at the very end, to create. It says on our sheet, it says 3 questions. So three questions. So create 3 multiple choice questions. Because those questions are actually going to be part of the final exam. Not every one of them will, but they will be kind of our pool, make part of our pool of questions that we will use in creating the final exam. So, Chengrat, would you please send me your questions, and make sure that your colleagues have your questions from your chapter also. While I'm at it, would all of you please type in your email address. For example, I will want to send Chengrak his evaluation sheet from his presentation, and so I would like to send that directly to him. But in the future, there may be times when we want to send a message to all of you. So if all of you would give me your email address, I would appreciate it. Okay, what else do I want to cover real quick? Your first creative project is due next week. If you look at your syllabus, it is not real complicated. You are to just write somewhere around 200 words. And let me go back myself. I reworded it a little bit from last year. So it says, write a short essay, about 200 words, about how you think the media, including online media, will affect Korean society over the next 60 years of your lifetime. So a lot's going to happen during your lifetime, and it's, you can pull out your science fiction on this. Maybe, we'll be, probably some of you have seen videos on the internet where they have what some call 8D, where they're showing where movies look like you were right there. You feel like, I remember one, there's a whale that jumps out of the water and splashes down, and it looks like you're going to get wet. What is our media going to be like in the future, and how's it going to affect us? So that's I want you to think about it. There's not a specific answer I'm looking for. I want you to be creative in your thinking, imaginative, and tell me what you think the future holds for us in the realm of media, and how it will impact, how it will affect. I say here Korean society, but for those of you from China or Thailand, wherever, go ahead and you can refer to your own country. That's fine. So while I say Korean, I mean your homeland is fine. Okay. Okay, the next presenter, as I understand it, will be, who's coming up? Dayun Park. Okay, Dayun, I presume you'll be ready next week. Oh, in fact, we have two next scheduled for next week, don't we? So I'm not going to have much time to talk next week. I'm not sure we will get totally done, because that would be then Dayun and then Jiwan would both be presenting next week. Be ready. Well, I presume, yeah, we should have time. If you keep it to 20 minutes, we should have time because even though Frederick is going, in theory, going to try to cover 2 chapters too, he has to go to another class. So he can't be here. He has to end when he usually ends. So we should have plenty of time for 2 of you to do your presentation if you keep it to 20 minutes. Okay? Okay, I'm going to, we've got a few minutes still. I want to bring up a PowerPoint of my own. So I'm going to quickly bring that in. I was working on it while Frederick was presenting, so I'm having to upload it now. Oops. I just wanted to add a little bit to the discussion of magazines from my own experience and research. I'll take a second here to upload it. I know I don't have much time, but it should. Anyway, I made it so I can go quickly through it. I may not be able to cover everything I'd like to cover, but okay, magazines. Okay, so I want to cover just a few things. I'm going to turn off some that and that. There are some more recent changes. I'm going to update just a little bit from my recent research. In 2014, as it says here, the average single-cell circulation fell by 14%, and overall circulation fell for the 7th year in a row, 2% in 2014. This is only of American magazines, but I think we see trend lines going across the world. Here in Kazakhstan, for example, it may not have hit at all yet. In fact, the magazine circulation may be increasing. I don't have statistics on that, but I don't think the internet is having quite the impact on the traditional media. And the traditional media, of course, the country's only existed as an independent nation for a little over 20 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So a lot of the media is in the growth stage. A lot of the traditional media is in a growth stage, somewhat inhibited by the government and how it kind of impedes, some of the media doesn't like here in Kazakhstan, particularly newspapers they don't like, but things like that. But the magazines, I would say, might even be increasing here in Kazakhstan and may for a few more years, 5 years, who knows how long. Of 16 news magazines that were tracked by the Pew nonprofit organizations, they did better than the average magazine in America. The Nation was the hardest hit, the Nation magazine, and saw a decline in its subscriptions by 18%, as you see here. Wired magazine did the best with an increase of 6%. Wired has been very aggressive and very, of course, it's very high tech, it's very nature. I don't know if you've seen any content from Wired, but Wired emphasizes, even though it's a news magazine, emphasizes technology, and so it kind of is growing with the transition in the media. The top news magazines by circulation in America, Time Magazine, 3.3 million, Rolling Stone, 1.5, Vanity Fair, 1.2, New Yorker, 1 million, Bloomberg, Business Week, 1 million, Forbes, almost 1 million, Wired, almost 1 million. To kind of get an idea of among the news magazines what's most popular. In 2014, the single cell circulation fell 14% overall for the seventh year in a row. So again, we're seeing, as in the newspapers, as we talked about last week, the circulation is decreasing, which will have a dramatic impact and will lead to the demise of many of the publications if they don't figure out how to compete online. The New Yorker is working really hard on their digital, and so they now have digital subscribers numbering in 80,000, which again, since their overall circulation's over 1 million, that's not a huge number, but it's still increasing rapidly. Vanity Fair, Bloomberg, Time, they're all working hard and increasing their digital subscriptions as well. I mentioned here, New York Magazine has the most digital single sales, which quadrupled in 2014 to 26,000, making about 70% of its single sales digital rather than print. So again, they're coming up with a strategy that seems somewhat successful. Whether it's going to be enough to save them, I don't know. Forbes has the most unique visitors on their website, about 50% more than the nearest rival, which is Time Magazine. That's very important. Forbes has been very aggressive in its things like social media. They reach out to the public, so to speak. I get some updates from them on a fairly regular basis via email. So they've been pretty aggressive in trying to draw people to their website. About half of the 16 news magazines that they were tracking had at least 10% more mobile visitors than desktop visitors. This is an important change technologically. We know that the number of mobile connections to the internet is about quadruple now the desktop connections. But most websites are not yet mobile friendly. About a year ago, you may recall that Google announced that any website that was not mobile friendly, that did not have either a totally different mobile website or was adaptive to mobile, was going to be penalized in Google searches. And there was some scare throughout the advertising community and the marketing community that this was going to devastate some companies. It hasn't, I don't think, been too devastating. The impact or the algorithm they use, their search algorithm they use, I don't think has penalized the non-mobile websites as much as some people feared, but they might increase it over a period of time. So it's become increasingly important for publication to become mobile friendly because that's the future. As I said, there's already 4 times as many mobile connections, and I would say probably the only reason why mobile is not more dominant is the fact that web pages are not adequately mobile friendly, mobile accessible. There was a study of, I can't remember, 100 of the top magazines around the world, just I think it was 2 years ago, so it's a little bit dated. But at that time, it concluded that 90% of those magazines were not fully mobile accessible. And so that was an indication that they hadn't become a high enough priority, and that it needs to be. So some of the magazines still have more visitors from desktop, but most of the magazines have significantly more visitors from mobile. I mean, in spite of online readership increasing, magazines nationally are losing advertising. So overall, their overall circulation is dropping. So they're trying, as newspapers, to increase their online readership, but it just isn't substantial enough. And advertisers are not willing to pay as much for a mobile reader as they are for a print reader. Somebody who buys a print publication, they think is a little more serious about it, I guess. And they're kind of spoiled by Google and by Facebook, who have pay-per-click options and things like that. And so we see their revenues continuing to drop, which is a bad sign for the future. We do see specialization, and even though Frederick said that most magazines have more of a national or regional outlook, there are thousands of local magazines in America. For example, I've been involved with 2 of them myself, and I'm going to try to bring those up right now. I'm going to have to go. Well, I may not be able to. Let me see. I'm going to go real quickly to. Well, we're running out of time, so I think I'm going to go real quickly, actually, to go to the browser here and show what Wired is doing. I mentioned Wired already as one of the most aggressive ones. I'm going to show a little video that includes a piece of Wired.
I'm Dr. Ken Harvey. The communications industry is the fastest growing industry in the world. It is also the fastest changing industry in the world. What you are about to see is what online publications are becoming right now. It may surprise you, but it is just the beginning of this.
Are you able to see that video as I'm showing it? I wanted to make sure I know it's recording into the system, but can you see that video? I'm just going to play a little part of it if you can. Otherwise, this is the website of it, I believe. No, you cannot see it. Okay. Well, I will post this on Facebook. In fact, I'm going to post a couple of websites on Facebook for you to take a look at and comment on. But basically, this Wired one shows kind of what the potential is for an online magazine. It's really quite exciting, and so I want you to see what an online magazine can really look like. And Wired, as I said, is very cutting edge, very technology oriented. So it's very appropriate for them to have a website that is special in the way that it presents its content. So that's the first one I'm going to put online. I'm also going to just put a couple of others just to show a couple of magazines local magazines that I produced. And they have potential. With local magazines, special interest is most important. I know we're out of time. Well, I guess I have maybe just one real quick story. In 2009, right after the crash, so to speak, the Great Recession hit, a magazine publisher here in Almaty came to my class and was telling us about her magazine, which was a magazine, kind of a glamour magazine about hairstyles and makeup and all things women, clothing and stuff. But what made it unique was that it was local, and their distribution was 100% or almost 100% free circulation. It was a glossy, beautiful magazine, free circulation only to beauty parlors. So they would go to a beauty parlor, places where people get their hair done and so forth, and they'd put a stack of magazines in each beauty parlor throughout the city of Almaty. So I'm not sure what their total circulation was, but they exactly hit their target market. They're exactly, exactly the people they wanted. They were there for women who wanted to look beautiful, who were paying to look beautiful, and who would look at a magazine to tell them how to look beautiful. And so the students asked him, or asked her, how the recession was affecting their new magazine. And the response by the publisher was, "What recession? What recession?" Specialization allows you to, first off, focus on exactly the target market you want, just like this magazine did. Focus your advertising exactly on your target market. So if you put in the same ad that you put in that magazine, let's say it has 10,000 circulation. Maybe it has 20,000, I don't know. But let's say it has only 10,000. Well, these are 10,000 women sitting in a beauty parlor, wanting to be beautiful, reading a magazine about beauty, and reading ads about beauty. Compare that to putting that same ad in a local newspaper. How much circulation would that newspaper have to come anywhere close to that magazine? It might have to be 1 million. I mean, it has to be so much greater circulation in a general interest newspaper. First off, the newspaper wouldn't have slick paper. The ad wouldn't look as good. It wouldn't hit, it would be sent out to all sorts of people who had no interest in that ad. Those who did have interest might not even notice it because it's in between all this other stuff in that newspaper. So this magazine was thriving during the recession because it had exactly identified the market it wanted, the advertisers it wanted, and it put them together and was able to charge enough for their advertising that they were very, very profitable. That's one of the that's one of the major trends in magazines over the last 20 to 30 years is the trend away from general interest to special interest. And the trend, and that again allows not just special interest content, but special interest advertising, and allows the advertiser to pinpoint its target market. So it's not just the writer, the author, the publisher pinpointing the target market. It is the advertiser being able to pinpoint its target market and not waste money sending an ad to people that have no interest in it. So that's been one of the biggest changes and so even when we call Wired a news magazine, it's really a special interest news magazine. It's for people who are really interested in technology. So even some of the so-called news magazines are not general interest news magazines. Forbes is not a general interest news magazine. It's a business magazine. And so even among those that Pew considered news magazines, they're totally different than the news magazines that I grew up with, like Time Magazine and U.S. News and World Report and so forth, some of which are dying, well, basically are dead. So we're seeing a number of major trends continuing, specialization, but now, of course, online, and that's where I wanted to show you that video. But go ahead and I will post that on Facebook, and so you can watch this video related to Wired magazine specifically, and you can comment on it there. Any questions, any problems that you all have? If not, we will wrap it up today. Any questions? Anything I can help you with? So get your first creative project, write your little essay, and we will be prepared for 2 more presentations next week. Okay, thank you. Have a good week, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
I'm Dr. Ken Harvey. The communications industry is the fastest growing industry in the world. It is also the fastest changing industry in the world. What you are about to see is what online publications are becoming right now. It may surprise you, but it is just the beginning of this digital communications revolution.
One thing that we've been great at doing is telling stories and communicating ideas and information. Whether you're an editor or an art director or designer, you're basically creating story arc, just like a film director does or a musician. We've been able to do that in print. Our readers have relationships with brands. We have a great website, we have a great print magazine, and this is just adding one more avenue of communicating and connecting with the brand of Wired. And really that's a huge opportunity for magazines. We really would like to offer more choices to our readers and to our advertisers and move beyond just the static notion of ink on a piece of paper.
What we're doing with Wired Magazine is collaborating on the digital version of their magazine with the same designers and the creative people that publish the print version. Newer technologies like Adobe Air are now powering a new wave of interactive capability to display rich text, imagery, animation, interactivity, all within a single platform that can reach a variety of devices.
There's still going to be the rich storytelling, there's still going to be narrative art, but we'll be able to do it in short film. And 360s, the ability to turn a product around and look at eyes of it.
There's this immersive experience which they can navigate completely by natural hand gestures back and forth between the pages of the magazines and all the entry points. If they want to dive deeper and read a full article, they scroll down within that. So we've created a dual-axis navigation system.
At the bottom, we have what we call the scrubber. And it's got a little thumb that you can browse through and see every page in the issue, edit in advertising. Up at the top, we've got the browser, and by touching that, you get a visual overview of the entire magazine. It zooms back and shows you a magazine deconstructed.
We also have rich social features allowing people to clip articles, share them with friends, store them in their favorite bin. The ability to tweet about an article that you like, to post it to your Facebook page. It's a whole new world here for magazines.
This is what we've been waiting for 15 years. We've been waiting for an opportunity to use all these visual tools at our disposal to tell these stories in a way that is efficient, that is multidimensional. But we also need an opportunity to reset the economics. For the first time people may value this experience so much that they'll pay for it.
Advertising is as important as the editorial in all of our magazines, and especially in Wired. People come to Wired for the authority of the edit and the richness of the experience to learn about new products and services that our advertisers provide.
It's a really exciting time for publishing because the relationship the user has with the brand is now not just limited to the relationship with the traditional version of that content, but also there's new ways now to establish those relationships with customers.
We want to build a way for our readers to engage with that content on any screen or device that they want to. These changes are on par with the changes that media experience going from radio to television.
Wired is known for breaking all the rules in print and doing really amazing things with their design of their print publication. They're obviously one of the most forward-thinking publications out there. One of the reasons we teamed up with Wired was because we knew if we could solve their needs in this digital publishing world, then we could probably solve a lot of other magazines' needs. So there's really been a great collaboration between Wired and Adobe.
You see what publications are becoming online and on your iPad or iPhone, but the technological revolution is gaining speed, and all of our methods of communications will be changing with the technology, and new opportunities arising. Within the next 10 years, for example, you will begin seeing electronic publications, as one demonstrated in the following video, that are literally as thin as a piece of paper. Paper-thin computers that you can literally hold up and put in your pocket. So, as I said, the communications industry is the fastest growing industry in the world and the fastest changing industry in the world, which makes it the industry with the greatest opportunities in the world, as demonstrated by such recent success stories as Facebook, Google, and YouTube, all of which were created in the last decade. And it's an industry that you can be a part of. Come see us in the Department of Journalism and Mass Communications. Thank you.